Hello and welcome back to ARM Studios. I'm a guest host, I guess, Jason Foster. I'm the CEO of Ori Biotech. With me during this session, we have Jason Bock. Jason is the CEO of the Cell Therapy Manufacturing Center, which is a joint venture between MD Anderson and National Resilience. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can you give us a little bit of the background, the historical context on the CTMC, how it got started, and the kind of areas that you guys are focused in currently?
So I had a 20-year career in small, medium, and large-sized biotech and biopharma, developing products, bringing them into the clinic, and then through to commercialization. About 4 years ago, I got really interested in cell therapy, and coincidentally, some friends of friends connected me with MD Anderson, which was a pretty interesting place to do cell therapy. And so we created something very novel. Basically a biotech within MD Anderson that would help faculty members industrialize their cell therapies and then bring them into the clinic. And then about a year and a half ago, things were going along so well that we ended up spinning that out as a joint venture with National Resilience and opening the model up to biotech companies where we could help them, again, bring their research projects, industrialize them, and get clinical data from them.
It's kind of an interesting model because you kind of have two-way traffic, right? You've got programs and IP that's being developed within MD Anderson.
Yep.
And you're helping provide them expertise and service provision there, but also external companies that want access to maybe expertise that you have or MD Anderson has, PIs, clinical trials. So you act kind of as the intermediary between those two components. I think it's a really interesting model and unique, kind of the first of its kind.
I think what I saw is the chance in cell therapy, while we're still very early in this field, to turn some of the traditional ways of doing things on its ear. So, traditionally all the innovation occurs in universities and medical centers, spun out to biotech, and then maybe they come back and do a clinical study. But for cell therapy, there's still so much expertise, especially at these academic medical centers, that we could tap into, both on the knowledge and the science of cell therapies, as well as on the clinical development of them. And so that's why we put together this unique organization to help individual companies, but also, I think, the whole field move forward.
Can you give the audience maybe some examples of the types of challenges you guys are addressing or the things you're working on? Obviously, don't tell us anything proprietary, of course, but I know you're working on a lot of interesting projects internally at CTMC.
Yeah, what's fantastic about what we've set up is we do get to see a lot of different products. So in the last 18 months, we've brought 6 new cell therapies through IND-enabling studies to an IND and initiated clinical studies on those at MD Anderson.
Wow.
That throughput allows us to see lots of different things. We get a variety of processes that come in the door, trying to bring them up to a certain level of industrialization, trying to get together a sufficient package to present to regulators that we understand the product and are in control of the process, and different clinical studies to, as quickly as we can, understand how well they work in patients. What's really gratifying about cell therapies is that in relatively few patients, lots of times, you can see clinical responses. It's not like antibodies where for a year or two, you're doing safety studies, and of course we want the first products and the first cohorts to be safe, but we've seen clinical responses in patient number 1, patient number 2.
That is the unique feature of training a patient's immune cells to respond to a cancer. It has got a different clinical profile, different efficacy profile, maybe different safety risk profile than traditional interventions, traditional therapeutics.
And for therapies that are living and can expand in the patient when they're working really well.
Yeah. No, it's super cool. And CTMC is one of Ori's original early access partners. So our teams have been collaborating for the better part of 3 or 4 months now, I think.
Yes.
We have technology in your labs, in your labs in Houston. And thank you for your partnership so far. It's been great to work with the experts in the field. One of the reasons we wanted to bring you here today is to discuss some of the trends that are happening in the industry. So this idea of having a public-private partnership or a CDMO partnering with an academic institution, creating a third entity, a JV, is a very unique thing. It's not been done before, really. And that opens up the conversation around, well, what else could we do potentially? What other of the old models of working might we rethink? And so the topic I had asked you to come on to speak about really is this idea of, let's just call them alternative manufacturing models. We know that you have a long history in biologics. I grew up in small molecules. We build big facilities. We stamp out tablets, or we build, 10,000 liter stir tank bioreactors.
Or 20,000.
Pumping out antibody-based medications. That's been our model for the better part of 30 or 40 years.
Right.
And we're having to rethink some of those models for, as you said, personalized living medicines that are targeted to one individual patient. So wanted to discuss a little bit about kind of the alternatives that have been suggested out there, as sometimes called decentralized manufacturing, sometimes called point-of-care manufacturing. Those two things aren't the same thing, I don't think. So I might ask you to define what you think those things are, just so we have a common understanding, and also how that might play into, as you see it, what you're doing at CTMC, but also how the industry thinks about industry. I would like to say we're at industry 2.0. I'm not sure we are, but industry 3.0, industry 4.0. How do we take this industrialized, truly cell therapies? I think this kind of alternative manufacturing model may eventually play a role, and I'm interested in your opinion on that.
Starting back at the beginning, I think we're very excited about the partnership with Oribio. We've been talking about it for a long time.
Yes.
I know.
You finally got off the ground. Thank you. Yeah.
Yep. Managed through COVID supply chain issues.
That's right.
And,
COVID didn't help anything. Certainly, but
what you guys are doing can help solve a very acute challenge we have in cell therapy with scaling up. Because in cell therapy, as opposed to biologics, we more scale out than we scale up. We can't just build one big reactor. Every dose is personalized for each patient. And so that enables us to think differently about how we scale the manufacturing. I think what you guys have put together is a very specific solution focused primarily on autologous cell therapy.
Certainly at first,
making one dose at a time. And a threshold for improving that scaling of manufacturing is automation.
Yes.
And because it's going to be very difficult to scale manual processes out, because we haven't figured out cloning of people yet, or
decentralization of people, that's difficult. So,
right. So having automated processes that don't rely on manual interventions, I think, is a baseline requirement. And so that just has to happen. Even if you scale in a centralized manufacturing facility, you have different people. So no matter what the solution is, automation is critical. And then to your point about definitions, I think, sometimes when, at least I hear, or other people hear point of care, okay, well, we care for patients in a hospital room.
Right.
And does that mean we're going to put a bioreactor in every hospital room who's getting a CAR T? And, I think that's, a little fanciful.
Yeah, that's definitely not today's or tomorrow's solution.
Yeah. And I think even putting a manufacturing facility in each hospital is still a big challenge. So I think when I think of decentralized, it's more about regionalized, and maybe across the US it would be maybe 15, 20 major sites. That even is a huge step change from where complex manufacturing is today. I think the biggest barrier to that is how are you sure that you would produce the same product at each of these sites? How would you compare that? How would you qualify that? How would you demonstrate that to the FDA that yes, site 1 and site 24, if they start with the same material, will produce the same product? And that the critical quality attributes, or that how patients would respond to that, would be the same. And so the biggest challenge we have with that at this point is just understanding both the product as well as the process that produces that product.
Yes.
And so another really incredibly important aspect at this stage of where the field is just gathering as much data as we can, specifically about the process. And I think one thing that the Ori device does really well is gather continuous data on a number of different process attributes. And then as we better understand the product, we can tie these process attributes to product attributes And then the real hope is to tie those product attributes to clinical outcomes.
Clinical benefits, yeah.
And we've seen this starting to happen as some researchers have shown that more naive, younger T cells behave better in the body. And so over time, that's going to become a critical quality attribute. The number of young T cells versus more experienced T cells will be an important part because that can control the clinical outcome.
The model that you just described, the kind of potential future state, you obviously are part of a joint venture between MD Anderson and Resilience. Resilience has, I think, 14 manufacturing sites around the country, something like that.
Yeah.
And so this idea of having what I would call centers of excellence, so that kind of 15 or 20 sites that have the capability, the infrastructure, the quality systems to deliver these kinds of products becomes a very potentially compelling proposition to be able to say, okay, I'm within 1 day's drive for most patients. You're cutting vein-to-vein times, you're cutting the burden on. I think what a lot of people don't realize is, if this is a full family endeavor, right?
Yeah.
Someone gets cancer, the whole family likely might have to move for months at a time. It's very difficult for a partner to work. The kids, what happen? There's all these other things besides just the patient getting treated that we have to be concerned about. So bringing the manufacturing process, the treatment process closer to the patient would be beneficial.
For sure.
And how potentially are you and maybe your partners at Resilience thinking about that, the application of that, the hurdles? I know the FDA had done a workshop last November thinking about this. Like how would we regulate this? How would we control for those critical quality attributes you're mentioning? Is this an active thought process within your team and within your partners, or is it something that, maybe a step or two in the future for you?
Probably both at the same time.
Okay, all right.
So first, to go back to what you asked originally, I think that's a really interesting aspect because on one hand, the administration of these cell therapies is challenging for patients.
Yes.
Like you said, family affair and requires a certain amount of time. On the other hand, one of the stark benefits of cell therapy is that they can be single dose curative treatments. So while that family is consumed with the treatment regimen, after that, for a high percentage of patients, that's the last cancer treatment they'll ever get.
Right. And it's relatively low touch follow-up maybe and
Yeah.
lower demand than the current status
Yeah.
or standard of care, which, as we know, multiple rounds of chemotherapy and a transplant, and those things can be quite all-encompassing.
That's what's been stark about being associated with MD Anderson and being so close to patients and hearing from doctors all the time, that it's just life-changing whether you're had this one treatment and then come back once a year for a checkup and a scan versus coming back for repeated cycles of chemotherapy and spending all your vacation time getting chemotherapy.
That's
I mean,
right.
you're still a cancer patient.
Yes.
To your point about how do we enable this more, so Resilience and CTMC are thinking about this all the time, where the field can be. We're still at early stages of the field. It will take years, multiple years, 5, 10 years to really implement, because this is a whole transformation to how care is delivered.
It is.
But if we don't engage in that process now, it'll never, 5 or 10 years won't happen. It's fundamental on the manufacturing process to have these automated, scalable systems that can share data, that can have the implementation of them be in a decentralized regional way, as we talked about, but then still be able to share the data centrally, I think is key. Another aspect is the quality control and being able to simplify. Currently, we run like 10 or 12 assays for each and every product we release.
Yes.
That just gets multiplied by the number of doses. So we need to do other things, and Resilience is very much engaged in trying to consolidate and simplify the release panel and all of the release paperwork associated with making sure we made the right product and made it at the right quality, but simplifying that.
Yeah. Great segue. Great segue into my next question. So you were talking about automated systems being crucial to the success of any manufacturing process, but certainly one that has multiple sites. You just alluded to, I think, another critical success factor, which is a digital kind of underpinning, a digital foundation, because you can't be batch releasing on 1,000 pages of paper batch record every single product in 15 or 20 different locations. That is just not going to work from a quality control perspective. So what do you think the minimum threshold, the minimum kind of requirement is? I know you guys have adopted technology already at CTMC, not only Ori's, but Benchling, a partner of ours, is your kind of ELN. Think about how we digitize some of the process mechanisms, the PD, the sausage making in the background before we even get to GMP, and being able to learn from that. So maybe tell us a little bit about your thinking on digitization, the digital journey that you guys have been on, and where you think the industry needs to head.
In the past, let's say for an antibody to bring forward to commercialization, we may have only made 6, 9 batches of that product before we try to commercialize it. Cell therapy, it's upwards of hundreds. And so I think in the past, digital would be nice. It's always, it's just intuitive that having systems on, digital is easier to share and look at data.
Yeah.
But there's a certain burden with implementing these systems, and we've been doing paper-based things for decades, and we've got that pretty well down.
It never seems like the most urgent problem to solve today. It's not one of those things that's maybe a nice to have, it's maybe in the future.
And there's a pretty big activation energy to install some of these digital systems and transition the way you work, because it's a very regulated environment. We're used to paper signatures, and it's basically necessity is the mother of invention, right? You could get away with that when you're making 9 batches before a commercial product.
Not when you're making a couple hundred.
When you're making a couple hundred, you just can't do it. So that creates enough activation energy to push us to implement these, which are better in the long run anyways, but give us enough impetus to implement them. So that was one of the reasons that we created the joint venture, was resilience is at the forefront of digital electronic systems, and we benefited a lot from their expertise in that area and implementing those at CTMC.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we were so positive on working with you and them, is that you have this kind of in your DNA. You're thinking this way, and many people aren't. And so my final question, and probably the thing I'm most excited about for the rest of 2023, we're still in 2023, right? Yeah, okay. It's been a long day, long week.
Long year.
Exactly. We're going to be doing potentially a multi-site trial with you guys later this year. So putting the manufacturing platform in 2 different locations, putting the same starting materials, the same reagents, the same process through the system, and demonstrating that we can get the same the CQAs and product out.
Yes.
And if we don't, we can look into the system and say potentially, why is that? And is that meaningful or not? And that kind of level of digitization and automation today isn't possible. So I'm super excited about that result, working together with you guys on that the rest of the year, and wanted to know kind of what your view of that is, that kind of POC we're going to be running towards the end of this year.
Yeah, I think it's a real life example of what we talked about. This is what we're going to have to do to be able to scale these manufacturing processes. Yeah. And so I really appreciate you specifically and Ori's partnership in realizing the value of that, putting together this partnership, really triangular with resilience. And then I think the important part of that is at the end of that study, we're going to put together a Type C meeting with FDA and say, we think we've demonstrated that these 2 sites are producing equivalent product. Do you agree? And
that'd be a great conversation. I can't wait for that meeting.
Yeah.
And I think it's a first step in a dialogue, but it'd be a really interesting proof point, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah, because at various meetings you talk about these things theoretically with FDA, but they really need a use case. They really need data to react to. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to generate that data and have that discussion with them.
Yeah. Well, we're going to translate that theoretical opportunity into reality later this year, and I'm excited for that. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining us.
Thank you for the discussion. Appreciate it.
See you soon. Bye.